Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another happy Friday plant consciousness commentary. Yay, Friday! Yay, Friday! Yay, Friday! I'm actually excited about this Friday. Lots of going on. It's been a very, very intense week. It's had lots of ups and downs, which I'm not going to get into too much because, meh. But I'm actually on a high right now, which is great. Not that kind of high, just a high. And we just had a really fun book club discussion, which is always great because it always helps me better understand the books that we're working on. And I have a really cool, I guess it's more of an article. It's a journal article that to go through today. And if you could see it by the title, it's called That 70s Plant Craze. And the reason I chose this, so there is a journal that comes out, I don't remember if it comes out every quarter, every season, but it's called Antennae, and it's the Journal of Nature in Visual Culture. So we have actually talked about this before when I reviewed, I did commentary on an introduction to a previous version of this journal by Giovanni Alui, who is the editor. And it was a really awesome discussion. He's a very good writer. I really enjoy, especially the idea of nature in the visual culture. I've watched him do several presentations before, and I really enjoy what he talks about. And I have some other stuff coming up too that I want to do. I have saved off some live streams that I want to, some conferences and webinars and stuff like that were held. Webinars not the right word. I can't remember what they called it, and that I want to do live commentary on. So, I've got a few things queued up, but I chose today to do this. Well, because as I was going through this journal, this is the edition from autumn of 2020. This journal, like I said, is often about vegetal entanglements, this particular edition. And as I was going through it, I saw this article about the 1970s plant craze. Now, for those of you who might, like me, have heard about the secret life of plants. When I first got in, my plant awakening, as you know, started with the music of the plants. And of course, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to understand what was the science, who was talking about this, where could I find out about what was going on relating to plant intelligence. This is now 10 years ago, actually 11, because I started in 2013. 2012, 2013 was when I started to get really interested in this. By May of 2014, I was already at the Chelsea Flower Show. We were presenting the music of the plants. So it was about 2012, 2013 that I really started to get into this topic. And in preparing for Chelsea, of course, I did all the research into everything that at that time had been published, and many people would talk to me about the famous book from the 1960s, The Secret Life of Plants. And then everything that happened from 1960s to the 1970s, which back then was still the stuff that was being published. Today it's a little harder to find it, but everything that happened between the late 1960s, when The Secret Life of Plants was published, when the film came out eventually, and then a certain amount of research that happened into the 1970s and the early 1980s was, at the time, from the mainstream public, the big point of discussion. It's what everybody was talking about. The thing, though, is that there's I was about to use a word, there is a bleeping load of controversy around all of those first pieces. And so when I saw this article, I thought, oh, how fun to revisit this with 10 years of experience and 10 years of new research to understand what was happening. So 2020, this article comes out. Let me share my screen so you can, at a minimum, see what we're starting to talk about. This is a beautiful journal also, in addition, and I can show you some of the other articles, because when I publish the link to where you can find this, of course, you will be able to find, you will be able to see all of the other articles, which are honestly really interesting. This whole journal is a really beautiful, there it is, which is really beautiful work. Okay, that's weird. What the? Okay, sorry. This is, Okay, there's something going on. Hold on, I got to shut it down and I got to restart it. As I go to try to share it, it basically says that it disappears. So it's really weird. It's very, very bizarre in how it's doing things. So let me move this over here. And then let's try again and see if hopefully now it will pick it up. Everybody is making updates to all of their software, and this is, there it is. Okay. Hopefully that worked. There it is. Okay, good. So let me see if I can make it bigger. No, 150 would be too much. All right, let's see, because the text on this is kind of small and you'll see why. So this, like I said, is called Antennae. It is the Journal of Nature in Visual Culture. And this is the autumn 2020 edition called Vegetal Entanglements. And like I said, the editor-in-chief of this is Giovanni Alawi, who I have talked about multiple times because he's somebody that I really enjoy his work. He is in the School of Art. He's in the Art Institute of Chicago, and also he teaches in other institutes of art, and he writes extensively. I actually debated whether or not I would just do his introduction, but we've already done that in a previous edition, and I feel like there's just some really good articles in this that it would be better to talk about those particular articles. So, but this is an academic journal. It just happens to be connected to plants or nature in general in the visual arts. And this one is very much plant focused. There are a few that, in my opinion, here are a little controversial and super interesting to go into. Like, for example, Diane Scher's, which is, you see here, plant root weaving, is at first glance for me like something, wow, amazing and gorgeous. And then, I don't know, I haven't figured it out. So I almost debated on doing that one for you because I can't really figure out whether she is using plants or working with plants. I still have questions. On that. I'm not 100% sure. The other one that seemed really interesting, there's a bunch of them that sound interesting. So these are the different articles that came out in this journal. Hello. Why are you being so weird? I can't, it's not letting me move. Ah! All right, hold on. I'm trying to figure out why it's not allowing me to move to the right. There we go. I don't know why. Anyway, so the Pansy Project is another one. The Botanicals of Social Justice looked super interesting also, talking with Jamaican dancehall culture and connected. There's just a lot of really interesting article. Also Plants and Other Cliches, which was more of an interview of this work. Yeah, there's just so many of them. So I chose one, maybe two, to go into. So let me scroll down to where that one is. And so that we can look at it together. I hope. It's a big journal. So there's a lot of stuff. There it is. Okay. Page. There we go. There it is. Hello. Where's the beginning? The beginning. There we go. Okay. So this is a paper, like I said, about the 1970s plant craze, connected to this whole concept. Why are you, it's not scrolling to the side. Like once I put it, oh, there we go. Now it's working. So this 1970s, it has a very strange format. Like I said, I can't seem to change the view. I don't know if maybe if I close this, go to menu, go to view, I want to rotate. Yeah, see, it doesn't allow me to have like a single page that's a really single page. Maybe read mode. We can try that. See if, but see, it doesn't allow me to, there, maybe. We'll see if it works. Okay, so I wanted to go through this because, like I said, in the 1970s, there was a lot of different experimentation done with the plant, around plant intelligence. It was very early on from the perspective of like scientific community. It was considered pseudoscience in a lot of ways. It did a lot of damage to the sector that we're still paying for today in a lot of ways. And I'll explain as we go along. I wanted to do this because I wanted to see their take on it now in 2020, where when I started in 2013, it was still like either you love it or you hate it. Like either you totally understood and believed all of these different research areas, or you were looking at somebody like Cleve Baxter, who is one of the main protagonists of The Secret Life of Plants, and you were saying, oh my God, you screwed up this industry for so long. So there was this, you know, kind of duality that was happening. And I wanted to talk about this because I think it's important for us to know that history, both from the perspective of what did Baxter figure out without, but that he couldn't prove at the time, but that today in its own way has been proven, or where was it that Baxter went completely wrong? And more importantly, as we're talking about more things that are coming online, because I am very much convinced that this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Plant consciousness and plant intelligence and being able to communicate with plants and all these different aspects is the next kingdom, the next kingdom that's closest to us. But we, you know, we have fungi right afterwards. We have bacteria, and we've been talking about this in the book club. And so I believe we're going to continue to expand on this. And what are some of the pitfalls that the plant community experienced because of this, I think could be really interesting as we expand and move on to other kingdoms and other ways of other types of beings that we're communicating with. And here we're still talking about at least the beings that we can scientifically recognize. Once we expand out from there to all of the subtle beings, I think it will be really interesting to have this experience and understand it, to be able to give us a better vocabulary for those of us that are interested in opening hearts and minds in the mainstream. For some cases, this isn't necessary at all, but I just find it really fascinating. So let's just dive in. The 1970s plant craze. In the early 1970s, a general plant craze caught on in visual and popular culture alike. Remember that this journal is about plants in the visual culture, or nature in the visual culture. So I just want to set that context because I think that the writers are going to take it back there. Against the backdrop of New Age spirituality, which I'm surprised they didn't put it in quotes, because in this period of time, New Age is still kind of hokey and not woo in the super empowering positive way that we think about woo today, because, you know, in the naturally conscious community, we are weird and woo, and we are proud of it. But this is more of the New Age spirituality in the sort of, what the hell are you doing type of way. And the flourishing of ecological thinking. The 1970s plant mania came as an eccentric blow to the belief that sentience and intelligence are a human prerogative. It also relied massively on the cybernetic paradigm, envisaged as a self-regulating biological systems. Plants were recognized as communication systems in themselves. In this essay, I sketch a brief portrait of this complex cultural movement as visual culture, and in particular, film came to be permeated by references to plant communication, plant sentience, and plant intelligence. In his 1972 video, by the way, I'm super curious if you ever watched The Secret Lives of Plants or any of the other video that is from the 1970s and 1980s all around plant intelligence. If you did, put it in the chat. I really want to know, and I want to know what you saw and what it meant to you. Like, do you remember? Did it stand out? What were your beliefs around it? I'm super, super curious. In his 1972 video, Teaching a Plant the Alphabet, the late John Baldessari holds up a succession of children's alphabet cards, repeating each letter to a potted banana plant until he has completed the alphabet. Oh, I so remember this video. Made for presentation at one of his classes at Cal Arts, Teaching a Plant the Alphabet is often quoted as a conceptual art parody, a reference to Joseph Beuys' influential performance, How to Explain Pictures to a Dead Hare. Both points are fair in his own words. Baldessari found conceptual art of the time too pedantic, and Beuys' performance was indeed one of the artist's most famous. But as Baldessari himself recalls, Teaching a Plant the Alphabet was done during the hippie times. There were books about how to communicate with plants. I thought, okay, I guess I'll start with the alphabet and then we'll talk. Indeed, the early 1970s were hippie times, even if the zeitgeist of hippie culture was slowly beginning to wane, and the conservation revolution loomed on the horizon. By 1981, the flower power of the flower children had withered. Daffodils and dandelion chains proved harmless against Reagan's doctrine. In the meantime, the seeds of our current infatuation with plant intelligence were sown. For Baldessari's recollection is accurate. In the early 1970s, the belief that plants were sentient and intelligent entities capable of reacting to human thoughts and emotions, as well as to animals' pain or music, became widespread, nurturing popular culture flirtation with vegetal beings. Magazine articles on the extraordinary powers of plants were literally everywhere, from the pages of the Ladies' Home Journal. Who remembers the Ladies' Home Journal? I remember the Ladies' Home Journal. I do. To those of electrotechnology. As the diktats of interior decoration stipulated, it was in good taste to fill one's residence with rattan furniture and all sorts of leafy creatures, cascading gracefully from macrame hangers. It became natural to play music to your houseplants. One certain Mrs. Hashimoto took Baldessari's satirical ventures seriously. Oh my God, I so remember this video. This is really where I started my education in plant intelligence, was with Hashimoto, with Baldessari, with Cleve Baxter. There was just so much. There was the beginning inklings of Stefano Mancuso and his actual research. Oh, yes. Even the first little book on the music of the plants, which was written in 2013 to 2014, it was published for the Chelsea Flower Show, which is a tiny, it's a really, actually I can see it, but I don't want to get up and get it right now. It's a thin booklet. And even there, we reference all of this research. I totally remember all of this research. She's setting herself to teach the Japanese alphabet to a cactus. As a New Scientist 1973 article observed, not only every art school diploma has its shares of vegetal sculptures, but also several artists are following the footsteps of scientists by conducting their own experiments with plants and treating these activities as works of art. Echoing which, by the way, is a trend that continues and is super powerful, because as we talk about all the time in the naturally conscious community, that we're talking about the fact that the arts helps us imagine the unimaginable. So this is really why I wanted to do this, because I want to be able to show that where art and science started to blend in the 1970s, eventually, regardless of whether or not things like Cleve Baxter were treated as a fraud or as something false, which, by the way, well, when we get to him, I'll talk to you about him, because I actually met a woman that worked with him up until his death. But even if we don't believe that he was on the right track or he heard everything, it is still the birth, that imagining with the arts allowed and made space, in my opinion, for what today exists. And the fact that now science started to see, oh, well, maybe we should study this because these artists are all doing these things and we need to prove them wrong. And in the end, some of them proved them right. So the arts, this is a beautiful proof, in my opinion, as we'll get down further into it, that the arts gives us a space to imagine what today we're still not able to see. Echoing other previous fads, tulip mania in the 17th century, the fern fever of Victorian times, etc., a general plant craze emerged in the late 1960s, catching on in visual and popular culture alike. Unlike those earlier fads, which fundamentally cut down the vegetal to the ornamental, the 1970s plant mania came as an eccentric blow to the belief that sentience and intelligence are a human prerogative. Against the backdrop of hippie times, which celebrated its first Earth Day in the, okay, let's see where this goes. Let's see if I can make it move. Okay, good. This is the art project of Baldessari. In the spring of 1970, a different form of relationship between humans and nature was slowly taking shape. The plethora of articles, books, vinyl records, artworks, and films on the subject of plant communication cannot fully be explained by hippie counterculture's love of nature, weed, magic mushrooms, and other mind-altering substances, even though those were important. Cold War paranoia, New Age spirituality, and more importantly, the flourishing of ecological thinking played their role in an entangled web of sometimes paradoxical tendencies where the zucchini seed that germinates faster to the sound of Mozart and the philodendron that thrives in Indian flutes are as much the proof of plants' mind-blowing sentience as the tacit evidence of rock music's fundamental evilness. By the way, as a person who loves rock music and even heavy metal, I have asked the plants what they think about that music. And in my groups, at the time I was in a research group's experience, as long as you love the music, the plants will love the music. So the problem in the case of all of the so-called tests that show that rock music kills plants was not that the rock music was killing the plants, but that the person's dislike for the rock music was killing the plants. I will say that there. Go experiment for yourself. Okay. Moreover, in the 1970s, plant craze relied massively on cybernetic paradigm, systems theory, and electronics. Envisaged as self-regulating biological systems, plants were recognized not only as being able to communicate, but as communication systems in themselves. By the way, the music of the plants itself, not directly a part of the craze in the sense that it wasn't that people were watching what was happening, because in Italy, a lot of this messaging wasn't arriving, but how interesting of the flow of synchronic thoughts that are happening, that the experimentation with the music of the plants starts in 1978. I find that super curious. The electrical and chemical responses to the environment and other stimuli, such as telepathic stimuli, were now understood in terms of inputs and outputs that generated feedbacks. Their intelligence resides in the capacity to learn and self-correct in response to feedback, mirroring the intelligence of other larger and more complex natural systems, among which Gaia itself. I like that you use the word Gaia. I hate that you use the word itself. Can we use key self? Can we use something else? Oops, sorry. As famously hold that thought, advocated by James Lovelock and Lynn Margulies. Can I tell you I love Lovelock? I love Lovelock. I love Margulies too, but I love Lovelock. In 1975. In what might appear as a surprise to those who presumed that plant communication was merely about hippies hugging trees or passing through the chemical doors to perception, the 1970s plant craze was eminently technophilic. Even eco-mystical quests to reach the plant other, often depending on the interfacing of electronic extensions, i.e. on biosensing. Conversely, psychedelic experiences were sometimes explained with the language of cybernetics. See, the biosensing makes a lot of sense. This was what was in the ethers. This was what the thoughts and the ideas that were traveling through the synchronic lines. And I believe that this is why many Damanhurians started with the process of the music of the plants in this same period, because the music of the plants at that time was pretty much a biofeedback device. I mean, it still sort of is. It's just a refined one. And so the idea of sensing these biosignatures that are being given off by the plant in order to create the language of music. Perhaps more than ever, the intermediation of different machines proved essential to the plant intelligence argument. The communicative sentient plant is a mediated plant. As a matter of, oh, hold on. Excuse me. As a matter of course, hold on, I want to see if I can make this even bigger. Oh, that's so much better. Sorry, I had to make this bigger on my screen because the text is very small. As a matter of course, the history of science and pseudoscience's encounter with plants, awareness of other plants and of their surroundings has relied from the 19th century onwards on the mediation of visual and other technologies. Without this visual and audio scaffolding that allows us to tune into the so many unanticipated possibilities and aspects of vegetal life, our conception of the plant other in sensitive, intentional, and ultimately intelligent terms would not be the same. And this makes perfect sense when we really think about it, because where other species use different kinds of primary senses or have other kinds of primary senses, the human being's primary sense is visual. And therefore, it makes sense that for us to be able to really kind of conceptualize and believe what we were seeing, we had to see it. Believe what we are seeing. We had to somewhat see it. And then if you think about it, auditory is second, right? What we hear, because those are the two biggest senses that we rely on. We don't, yes, if I touch an object with my eyes closed, I can't necessarily recognize what that object is unless it's something super common or very easy to define, but I can't just imagine it. I remember when I was a kid, I went to a Halloween party as a child, and they put this tray in front of me, and the tray was covered, and you were supposed to reach into it to try to identify what the objects were. Of course, it was Halloween, and they were like, these are the parts of so-and-so's dead body. And so it was things like, I reached in and I felt these little things that I was like, what is that? And they were like, that's his teeth. And I started to freak out. And then it was like, the next thing was a jelly-like substance. And they're like, those are his eyes, like these round jelly things. And then another thing. And I was getting progressively more hysterical until they pulled off the sheet, because I was so hysterical about this fear of that we had killed somebody in order to get this. And they were like, look, it's just little pebbles, and it's just, some kind of candied round thing, which made the eye, and everything, it turned out, of course, was fake. So our sense of touch is not really as sensitive as if we instead just close our eyes and hear, even more powerful than the smell, because I think smell ties into more unconscious, but consciously, we can identify bird sounds. And if I shake water inside, and there's no water in here, but if I shake water in here, I can say, oh, that's probably, a water bottle with water in it or some kind of liquid in it. So it makes sense that the first experimentations into understanding plant intelligence would be into visual and auditory aspects, because those are two things that we as human beings have senses that are more refined for. Where was I? In the following pages, I wish to sketch a brief portrait of this complex cultural movement as visual culture, and in particular film, came to be permeated by references to plant communication, plant sentience, and plant intelligence. Hold on, I just want to see how this cuts. Okay, so just making sure. The 1959. So most people don't know, but The Secret Life of Plants, like I said, is a book that came out in the early 1960s. Most people think it's a 1970s book, but it was actually in the late 1960s that it was finally came out. The first research of this was The Power of Prayer. Not first, but like one of the most popular ones was The Power of Prayer in Plants. There's another book called, I've read The Power of Prayer in Plants. There's another one called The Power, not The Power. So The Secret Power of Plants or something like this is what it's called. It's super, super, super interesting. There it talks about Chandra Bose and a few others that were in the field already. And it also references this Reverend Franklin Lower, who did extensive, quote unquote, research around prayer and plants. And there was a lot of healing modalities that were starting to be tested around the idea of putting healing on plants, in other words, or on seeds, and propagating seed growth or improving seed growth based on these things. It's really a fascinating time for lots of experimentation that actually made it into literature, but then somehow disappeared between the 80s and the 90s, in my opinion. There was just like a lull, and I think we're going to find out from this why there was that lull. Based on 700 experiments implicating 150 people and 27,000 seeds, the book illustrates how McCarthyism and its deep-rooted fright of communist atheism stirred American piety. In the 1950s, as many as 94% of Americans believed in the power of prayer. Scientists quickly dismissed Lower's book. Lower's book is super interesting to show all the different types of experiments that he did around prayer. He had people pray over seeds about all kinds of different things. And he documented how the seeds grow grew better when they were prayed over. And this is not like you said, 150 people, 227,000 seeds, 700 experiments. It is very well documented and yet so dismissed. But the idea that the mind could somehow have its way over vegetal matter continued to make progress. Psychic research, whose potential for military and domestic intelligence was apparently evident for more than just the odd science fiction writer, was to gain momentum from the 1950s onwards on both sides of the Iron Curtain. A quick search on the CIA's online archives returns an interesting number of declassified reports on the study of psychic phenomenon, sometimes in relation to plants, which the military, in their perpetual war against the enemy, dreamt of turning into organic sensors, bioinvader green spies. I remember when I first started in this world, there was experimentation happening, and I never heard what happened, of, for example, plant biosensors in airports, like having the plants be quote unquote edited, kind of gene editing type work in order for plant bioluminescence to appear if there were certain chemical signatures like bomb making materials in the air. So there was really a thought process that plants could be, I'm going to try to put it into a positive terms. I think the positive terms was partners in the war against crime, in the war and in war in general. Like, of course, I think many of the people were just using the plants. I think from what I remember reading in that time frame, I do think there was a little bit of both. I do think that there was some people that really thought of the plants as partners in this. But unfortunately, I think the majority of people didn't, and they were just trying to use the plants. But you can already imagine that. In 1966, and against all reasonable odds, an inconspicuous event was to shake the very serious world of botanical knowledge. Now, this is an important aspect. I want you to listen to this. By the way, based on what we're going to have, I actually have a polygraph that I've used on plants. It's over there. But that's that's where I started. A polygraph event expert working for the CIA, Cleve Baxter, decided on a whim to hook one of his machines to the leaf of a Dracaena. See, everybody loves Dracaenas. We love you. Sorry. He wanted to see how the plant reacted to being watered. To his astonishment, after a minute or so, the galvanometer registered a surge of electrical activity in the plant, similar to that of an emotional stimulus in human subject. Baxter was intrigued and decided to proceed with his experiment by dunking a leaf of a plant in a cup of hot coffee. No reaction. What if he burnt it? And there it happened. As he imagined the Dracaena being set on fire, the needles of the polygraph rouse again, as if the plant could read his mind. As his hagiographers put it, this was Baxter's eureka moment. He felt like running into the streets and shouting to the world, plants can think in the years to come. Plants can think. In the years to come, he and his collaborators multiplied the experiments, plugging dozens of plant and vegetables into lie detectors and concluding that lettuces, onions, oranges, bananas, and a multitude of ordinary houseplants could perceive and respond telepathically to human thoughts and emotions. As incredible as it sounds, and much to science dismay, Baxter's thesis on plants' extrasensory perceptions and their astounding emotional capacities, shared by the author in the winter of 1968. See, I told you that this book was that the book is in around the same period. Issue of the International Journal of Parapsychology were too quickly spread worldwide. How was this possible? Hippie times helped, as two concerned scientists were to bitterly acknowledge in the pages of American Scientist in 1979, so 11 years later. In the troubled years of the late 1960s, a wave of anti-intellectualism swept the United States, accompanied by an anti-scientism that still persists in some measure. Critics were quick to equate science with anti-humanism and call for the reliance on alternative ways of arriving at our understanding of the universe about us. This appeal found receptive ears in the world worried about in a world worried about pollution, we don't worry enough about pollution. We should worry more about pollution. Worry more about pollution. Pollution is making our planet inhabitable way more than climate change. Pollution. I'm not saying climate change is not something to think about. I'm just saying pollution. Overpopulation, unemployment, so weird. My thing is being very bizarre today. Unemployment, growing crime, and perhaps most important, a nasty and persistent war in which technology played a major role. More than anti-intellectualism and anti-scientism or anti-humanism, it's the reliance on alternative ways of arriving at understanding of the universe about us that interests me. As we will see, the hippie desire to heal the crisis in human nature relationships overinvested and sometimes romanticized the communicative systemic model behind Baxter's thesis, according to which mind can extend beyond the body into its surroundings, which is still a valid definition of consciousness today. It's a valid theory of consciousness. Cleve Baxter wasn't, I just want to say this, Cleve Baxter wasn't just a polygraph operator. He was one of the main teachers of how to use and work with a polygraph system in the CIA. Now, I spoke to his French translator many years ago, who became a good friend of his. He died pretty much destitute, like alone, and disgraced in a lot of ways, because we'll get into what happened next. But I have to say, I still think of Baxter as a pioneer. I think he was, unfortunately, a bit naive in not realizing that what he thought was scientific experimentation based on his knowledge and experience with the polygraph, which I don't know, a lot of people will say that they were not able to reproduce what he did, but I'm not so sure about that. I still think that we just weren't ready to hear it. And there was a lot of, remember, plants react a lot to the individual. Cleve Baxter believed, once that first eureka moment happened, he believed, and therefore the plants there was a relationship with him, even though he tried to get out of the relationship. And you'll see that too in his experiments. He tried to distance himself from the plants as to not interfere with the plants, but it's impossible. The connection, once it's made, it's made. And so I don't know. I feel like we did a really huge disservice to Cleve Baxter, and I really hope that everything that has come out now about the understanding of plants in some ways vindicates what he was as this amazing pioneer was able to bring to us, and would open the door to the world that we currently live in relating to our relationship with plants and plant intelligence. Sorry, let me see, where was I? Regarding his theories, they would have probably remained confidential if not for the flair of journalist and former OSS spy Peter Tompkins, and the author of such celebrated New Age classics as Secret of the Great Pyramids in 1971 and Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids in 1976. With the help of botanist and science vulgarizer Christopher Bird, Tompkins wrote The Secret Life of Plants, mainstreaming Baxter's findings and rediscovering along the way a number of forgotten plant intelligence champions, such as Bengali biologist Jagadish Chandra Bose, who I just told you about, that is in that other book that was very popular at the time, but very unknown now. I think it's called The Secret Power of Plants. I'm almost positive that's the name of the title of the book. Propelled by a lavish advertising campaign, including a partial pre-publication with the catchy title in the pages of Harper's Magazine, Love Among the Cabbages, Senses and Sensibility in the Realm of Plants, the book became a bestseller and was quickly translated into many different languages. Taking advantage of the volume's worldwide success, producer Michael Brown adapted it for the screen in 1978. Directed by Wallen Green, The Secret Life of Plants included an original soundtrack by none other than Stevie Wonder. All right, hands up if you've heard it. Seriously, everybody's heard it. It's so good. So good. But The Secret Life of Plants was not the only book to get the most out of the untapped powers of plant sensibility and communication. The same year, Dorothy Redelack's The Sound of Music and Plants was also to sell well. Like Baxter and lore before him, Redelack, a doctor's wife, housekeeper, bookkeeper, mother, and grandmother to 15, had conducted a number of experiments in the late 1960s. I love how they put it in quotes. I always wish, I feel like we should have a new dictum or a new like guideline that says that when you put certain words in quotes, like you should put a footnote that describes why you put it in quotes. I want a justification. Why is experiments in quotes here? Baxter's weren't in quotes. Why? In the late 1960s, using the biotronic control chambers available at Temple Buell College, Denver, her thesis, rock music was harmful to plants and therefore to humans too, and go back, rewind. She probably didn't like rock music. I'd like to know whether that's true. I want a verification on that. Redelac was not the first to investigate the effects of classical music on plant growth. She was the first, however, to expose them to a tape of Led Zeppelin, Vanilla Fudge, and Jimi Hendrix. Come on, who doesn't love Jimi Hendrix? According to her findings, plants seemed to like Bach and Ravi Shankar. Much to Redelac's surprise, they even gave positive evidence of enjoying jazz. Of course they would enjoy jazz. It's like completely out of the, of course they would, of course. However, when it came to rock, they leaned away from the music source, displaying smaller leaves and eventually dying. Some of those plants look like the people who attend rock festivals, confided an appalled Redelac. See, that shows the fact that she does not like the music. I stand by my interpretation given to me directly by the plants. Confided an appalled Redelac, I guess, to the pages of the New York Times. Despite Redelac's old school moral panic about rock, case in point, the idea that plants were sensitive to music's soothing capacities resonated with New Age beliefs in the healing energies of musical melodies. In October 1970, CBS aired a rock versus Shankar experiment involving plants and significantly filmed with time-lapse cameras. Redolac's name became known all across the US. Albums of music to grow plants were then making their appearance in record shops, such as the one that Dr. George Milstein produced exactly the same year, complete with a booklet and a packet of coleus seeds. If they would like, I agree. So Michelle writes, if they like jazz, it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't like rock. I agree. But again, remember, 1970s going into late 1970s, going into the 1980s, we are talking about censorship in music, Twisted Sister going before Senate committees. We're just talking about a period of time where, certain music wasn't very well appreciated. During the 1970s, a few plant music discs were released. Some of them simply compiled chamber and classical music hits, others such as Baroque Bouquet Plant Music or Roger Rogers de la Musique et des Secrets pour enchanter vos plants, offered original compositions for their green audiences. Among these, Mort Garson's Plantasia. Oh, I forgot all about Plantasia. Plantasia was such an interesting album. Plantasia, with its percolating moog rhythms, acquired a legendary status. One album in particular, Molly Roth's Plant Talk Sound Advice, evokes Baldessari's parody. A spoken word artist, Roth talks to ivies, ferns, and other plants, wondering if they understand English. At the same time, a few artists became interested in biosensing and plant generative music, among which John Cage, who used amplified plant materials, i.e. cacti. He basically strummed them and click them and hit them. At the same time, as musical instruments in pieces like Child of Tree and Branches. Others, such as ecofeminist Anya Lockwood, explored the effect of plant growth on musical instruments. But what about film? What role did it play in this peculiar plant phase? Craze. Okay, hold on. Stop it. I have to move over. So these are some of those different articles and pieces like, here's one device. Can plants be used with electronic equipment for some future exotic sensing and control system? Some investigators performing unusual experiments believe they can. Okay, let's see, we can go off to the right. There we go. Oh, this is such a weird, I'm sure that when he had like the actual journal in your hand, this is a perfect. Coined the term cybernetics in 19, okay, so wait, hold on. Oh no, I have to go up here. Excuse me. This is very confusing in the way that it's laid out, especially since I'm having problems. Okay, what role did film? We're still in the role that film played. Excuse me. Okay, what role did film play? Wired plants and cybernetics. Film, I believe, played an important role, and not only during hippie times. As I've previously hinted at, the mediation of graphic technology seems to have been a decisive element in the scientific or para-pseudoscientific exploration of the richness and complexity of plant life. A sort of epistemological, oh my goodness, they had to add epistemological in here. I thought we were going to get past ontological and epistemological. We were going to go through one of these without those words. Forget it. Epistemological. A sort of epistemological scaffolding opening up theoretical horizons around plant agency and their potential awareness, sentience. Why are all these in quotes? Why are they in quotes? Potential awareness, sentience, thinking, and even intelligence. I've argued elsewhere that the sentient plant is in many ways a mediated plant. The 1970s plant craze illustrates this remarkably well, since it relied massively on mediated plant. What do you think she means by a mediated plant? Help me out, chat. What does she mean by mediated plant? The 1970s plant craze illustrates this remarkably well, since it relied massively on polygraph machines, methodical scribbling, photographs of vegetal energy auras, electronic renditions of plant signals, and films of all sorts. Indeed, if cinema's powers are unique, and I believe they are, when it comes to the mediated plants, film should first of all be placed in the larger landscape of graphic technologies, allowing for the perception of plants' behaviors. Among these, the 20th century representatives of more ancient graphic method. Polygraphs, such as Baxter's iconic lie detector, simpler galvanometers, spectrographs, etc., are vital. Without these recording apparatuses, the secret life of plants would have remained concealed, imperceptible to the naked eye and the naked ear. These machines transform plants' electrical and chemical signals into nonverbal iconic language, the language of graphs, diagrams, and ultimately mathematical formulas. As I said before, this is super important for the way that we as human beings process. This isn't for the plants. This is the plants calling on Cleve Baxter to be like, hey, can you put some of this down? Because the other experiments, remember, were things like, which happened before and were published, were experiments like, I'm going to pray over a seed and we're going to measure how much the seed grows. Yes, visual, but they didn't really do it in that way. If they would have taken a lot of pictures, if it would have been the era of today with all of our camera technology that we have, then it would have been one thing. But not having that time lapse, not having all these other things, then you were relying more on a descriptor. And just humans don't, the idea that the polygraph machine could show the graph, could show how the plant was responding through a visual means, makes it so much easier for us humans to interact with what is happening. And I think that was extremely powerful for many of, that helped push and give a validity, whether there was validity or not. Endowed with an aura of scientificity, I like that word. These images extend vision into previously unseen, if not unknown, realms, as plant bioacoustics expands audition further. Despite scientists' immediate and continual insistence on Baxter's uncontrolled experiments, random observations, and anecdotal reports, the thesis on plants' extrasensory perception and their astonishing emotional capacities progressed, partially pushed by scientific imagery, in particular as embodied by graphs of jagged lines drawn on strips of white scrolling paper. Articles, books, films, and even record sleeves and booklets all included images of plants wired to these apparatuses as they meticulously generated their mechanic self-portrait, giving us access to their inner secret lives. Of course, plants writing themselves was not a new idea. For the highly influential The Power of Movement in Plants in 1880, Charles and his son Francis Darwin generated an astounding amount of images conceived with ingenious devices involving smoked glass plates and beads of wax on glass needles, and allowing for plants to record their own motion. Even more suggestively, in 1927, physicist and plant physiologist Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose is another pioneer. So amazing, all of the work that Bose did. Published the exquisitely illustrated plant autographs and their revelations. Bose was an important, see, they even called him an important pioneer. Read ahead. Bose was an important pioneer in the study of radio and electromagnetic waves, who later turned his attention towards the movement and electrical responses in plants. In the context of his research, he designed several innovative instruments, such as the photosynthesis recorder, the magnetic crescograph, registering plant growth, and the oscillating recorder, documenting the ascent of sap, or the automatic recorder, recording leaf movements as well as variations of temperature in plants. As Bose puts it in Plant Autographs, I've been able to make the dumb plant, we have to remember who he's speaking to in that time, I've been able to make the dumb plant the most eloquent chronicler of its inner life and experiences by making it write down its own history. The self-made records this made show that there is no life reaction in even the highest animal, which has not been foreshadowed in the life of plants. Let's repeat that line. The self-made, which means plant made the record themselves, the self-made records this made showed that there is no life reaction in even the highest animal, which we think is us, but we can have that discussion, which has not been foreshadowed in the life of the plants. Bose's enterprise encapsulates modern science aspiration to mechanical objectivity, aptly described by science historian Lorraine Datson and Peter Gallison as the insistent drive to repress the willful intervention of the artist-author and to put in its stead a set of procedures that would, as it were, move nature to the page through a strict protocol, if not automatically. But when the proud inventor refers to his machines as artificial organs of extraordinary sensitiveness, Bose also comes very close to some of Norbert Weiner's famous views, believing that engineering theories of control and communication could explain behavior in humans, animals, and machines. Weiner coined the term, I just want to double check that it seems like it continues on this page. Yes, coined the term cybernetics in 1948, laying the foundation of a new interdisciplinary field that was to become extremely influential during the Cold War. In his attempt to find common elements in the functioning of the human nervous system and automatic machines, Weiner suggests that every instrument in the repertory of scientific instrument maker is a possible sense organ. Every instrument in the repertory of scientific instrument maker is a possible sense organ. Curious way of putting it. Bose's links to cybernetics are not limited to his understanding of rendering apparatuses as artificial sense organs or human sense organs as antennae radiating in various directions and picking up messages of many kinds. His insights on vegetal beings as communicating systems that respond to stimulation through electrical signaling, aka the birth of the music of the plants, also foreshadows some of the tenets of cybernetic model. Bose's devotion to the decrypting what he calls the plant script is instructive, particularly when he discusses the pulsing movements of Desmodium gyrans, today known as Cardiocalyx motorius. On this remarkable species, a tropical shrub known for the gyratory self-movements of its leaves, I'm looking up at you, Diplenia, because you are showing me so much about that. I lost my place, sorry. Self-movements of the leaves, he writes, the small leaflets move up and down like the semaphore formerly employed for telegraphic signaling, concluding that there is evident similarity between the automatic pulsation of the leaflet of the telegraph plant and that of the animal heart. Bold words for that time. Bold words. Bold words. Although Bose was by no means the first to refer to this specimen as the telegraph plant, the media metaphor is worth stressing. The telegraph in the plant's name refers to the optical semaphore telegraphs made of movable wooden arms, which became a privileged means of military communication in Europe in the late 18th century and early 19th century. In India, semaphore telegraphs were introduced in 1810 and went out of service in 1880. In plant autographs, Bose refers to the optical telegraph after which the Desdemonian gyrans was effectively named, but symptomatically, his discussion of the electromechanical pulses of plants evokes the mechanisms of electrical telegraphy, which uses the coded pulses of electrical current to transmit messages. To think about communication in terms of electrical signaling is a pretentious affair, since the former is no longer thought of in exclusionary human-centered ways. I mean, these are the people that are just completely changing the way we experience and we think about life and the roles of different species on this planet, and especially human-centered. Cybernetics was to flourish in the USSR, permeating not only the discourse, but also the imagery around plant sentience, as evidenced by two Soviet documentaries shot by the, I'm not even going to say that word, the Moscow Studio of Science Films, The Voice of Plants, and Are Plants Sentient? Oh, I remember Are Plants Sentient. I've watched that. The film's iconography is clearly marked by the overwhelming presence of recording apparatuses, such as the polygraphs and their simple start graphs and other electronic instruments. Remember, all of this period today, I follow a lot of conferences and journals and all kinds of things. And it is still much more common to talk about animal communication than plant communication. Most plant communication still passes through this type of technology. It passes through technology, it passes through maybe the arts, but the idea of just straight up communication, kind of like I sit with in our discussion about the plant in the Plant Wisdom Book Club today, we were talking about animal communication and, like, for example, in equestrian riders who feel like they can communicate directly with the horse. And that within those circles is well understood. If you remember when I did the paper by Natasha Myers a while back on plant sensing, you will remember that many young scientists completely disregard or distance themselves from the idea of talking about the fact that plants communicate with them, with the individual scientist, with the human scientist, about which way to take for the direction of the science. They completely discard this. And even Monica Galliano in Thus Spoke the Plant was attacked, for lack of a better word. Her work was attacked because she still claims that many of her experiments were kind of dictated to her by the plants themselves, that the ideas for them and the understanding of how to read them and how to carry out the research, the moving from a human paradigm of the research, or a human protocol of the research, and trying to find an analogous plant-based one, was often expressed to her by the plants themselves. And she was ostracized for this. So we're still talking about the fact that in the 2010s, we were still seeing a lot of this. And so imagine in the 1960s, you have to show this through graphs and through machinery and through photographs and imagery, because you cannot just say, the plant told me so. You could barely say it today in certain fields. And imagine back then. Plant communication was taken very seriously in the Soviet Union, where by the end of the 1960s, it had become a subject worth studying in the best equipped science labs. By science labs. The voice of plants starts with several shots of 3 researchers in white coats gathered around a long strip of scribbled paper. Their expert eye can decipher what the machines themselves have already decoded. The film alternates exterior views of prairies and forest with lab shots, cross-cutting the customary time-lapse sequences of flowers blooming and plants spiraling around their tutors. However, the lab shots are more numerous and significant. The quest to hear and understand the voice of plants, which Soviet scientists hope will open up perspectives in terms of plant breeding in artificial climates. Not communication, not hearing what the plants think. So we think they're sentient, but we don't think that what they have to say matters. Why? Why is this the case so often? It's presented as an eminently technical enterprise. Superimpositions of plants and polygraph machines, foreground against the dark background, rank among the film's most striking images. As a small electronic chip is carefully grafted onto the plant's stem, the cybernetic paradigm becomes evident. Reports in the Soviet press mention transforming plants into a live electric relay. Let's just turn them in. Like, we believe they're alive, we believe they're signaling and messaging, but we're just going to turn them into a machine. The human mind is perplexing. I'm just going to use perplexing. I'm going to go with perplexing. Already in 1959, the director of the Laboratory of Biocybernetics at the Institute of Agrophysics, Vladimir Grigorievich Karamanov, I don't know, I probably pronounced that completely wrong, but it was fun, had published a report on the application of automation and cybernetics to plant husbandry. In the US, the October 1969 number of Electronics World includes an article on electronics and the living plants, inspired by Baxter's findings. So now we're at 1969. Skipping around in time a lot. I wish you would have kind of done a little bit. Like, this is 1959, but earlier we were in 1970s. The author describes the former as an exceptionally promising field. Are Plants Sentient, another Soviet science propaganda film, evokes the experiments led by Professor Ivan Izidorovich Gunnar, head of the plant physiology department at the Academy of Agriculture Sciences in Moscow. The film, which, let me just make sure that the other side is an image, and then what is an image of? Oh, here's the plant script. This was one of Baxter's. Oh no, it wasn't one. I thought this was one of Baxter's experiments, but he had a different one that looked very similar. They're using Mimosa pertica, it sounds like. Ah, yeah, there it is. Automated record of the response of the Mimosa. Interesting. This looks also like it probably, I wonder if this in some ways influenced Monica Galliano's work with Mimosa pertica. Interesting. Anyway, sorry, going back to where we were. Okay, excuse me. Oops. Okay. The film, which includes a sequence recalling Bose's pioneer experiments, insists massively on the electronic apparatuses available at the Academy. Are Plants Sentient is mentioned by Tompkins and Bird in The Secret Life of Plants, which makes sense because that was written in, wait, when was that? Oh, it doesn't say. It says it higher, but I think it was like the 1950s. Shot by Gunnar Chief's assistant, Leonid A. Panishkin, it was shown to the American delegation in the summer of 1971. According to Tompkins and Bird, one of the American envoys stated in his report that the movie's intriguing part was the method used to record the data. Time-lapse photography made the plants seem to dance as they grew. It's because they do dance. They dance, they play. That's flowers opened and closed with the coming of darkness as if they were creatures living in a different time zone, which they are. All injury-induced changes were recorded by a sensitive polygraph attached to the plants. Okay, I'm sorry. The term injury-induced changes, just, hold on, I have to drink. It's just tea, by the way, but The American delegates' reaction is surprising since time-lapse cinematography was used from at least 1989 onwards to study plant motion. However, his visual ignorance didn't prevent him from hinting at the exact point raised by film's capacity to manipulate timescale. Motion pictures can negotiate a transition from the plant as object into the plant as subject, into the plant as object again. What is more, into a subject with intentional movements that we still want to treat as objects. By reconciling the temporality of plant life with the temporality of human life, film potentially overturns the basic subject-object dualism, rearranging the frontiers of the living, expanding intentionality to a multitude of non-human subjects, censoring other sentiences, and exposing different modes of being alive. As French writer Colette wrote in 1924, a time-lapse film documented the germination of a bean. At the revelation of the intentional and intelligent movement of the plant, I saw children get up, imitate the extraordinary ascent of the plant, climbing in a spiral, avoiding an obstacle, grappling over its trellis. It's looking for something, cried a little boy, profoundly affected. He dreamt of a plant that night, and so did I. How is it that in 1924, we could be talking about this, and today we struggle with making people understand that plants are looking for a trellis and that they will not compete for a trellis unnecessarily? Like, why? Why do we keep learning these things and then forgetting them? Learning and forgetting, and learning and forgetting, and learning and forgetting. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. As film critics and theoreticians remarked very early on, cinema seems to be an animism's chief apostle. Instead of disenchanting the world, film re-enchanted it by imputing interiorities to animals, objects, machines, and naturally plants. I think this is why in the world of plant intelligence, there are a number of philosophers that we read about, and there are actually a number of filmmakers. Sarah Abbott is a really great example of that. Lots, even Prudence Gibson dabbles in that world a little bit. I think this is a really important aspect to remember the visual realm and its capabilities for helping us truly understand the vegetal mind, or better said, helping us grasp and use our human senses to understand the vegetal mind. By virtue of cinema's expressive resources, time-lapse, the close-up, editing, etc., films on plant motion seem to resuscitate what botanical herbaria dried and flattened between their yellowish sheets of paper. Rekindling with a world full of non-human intentionalities was not, however, the Soviets' goal. Even though a reporter from Pravda remarked that Professor Gunnar not only talked about plants as he would about people. And why did that not continue? Why did that die there? Why are we still having these discussions today? As he appeared to converse with them, Marxist cybernetic science was more preoccupied with discovering computable truths, allowing for an even more objective and efficient instrumentalization of the world. And herein lies the rub. Here's the problem. In short, with epistemic objectives of prediction and control. And this is it. We have this mean that opens up our expansion and then our desire to, because we are afraid to live in that space of non-control. We are afraid to live in the uncertainty. We as human beings are not good at this. We turn it all off because we want to move towards prediction and control. While hegemonic, this program had little in common with the New Age agenda of the American screen adaptation of Tompkins and Bird's book. Like The Voice of Plants and Are Plants Sentient, The Secret Life of Plants featured prominently all sorts of recordings and censoring instruments. Unlike them, however, the film is much more daring in its equally technophilic envisioning of plant beings, perfectly illustrating New Age's penchant for enlivening perceptions of nature. The picture takes plant sentience and intelligence as a cue to think about the systemic interconnectedness of all life. Towards the end of the film, footage referring to the Dogon's ancient cultural beliefs is cross-cut with images from a modern telescope pointed at Sirius. As Stevie Wonder sings, "A seed is a star." Not surprisingly, the secret, American, Soviet, different. And yet we all still close down because we feel this like, oh, wow. And then prediction and control, prediction and control. Not surprisingly, The Secret Life of Plants also makes abundant use of macro photography and time-lapse sequences, as French filmmaker and theorist Jean Epstein summed up in 1935. Fast motion reveals a world where the kingdoms of nature know no bounds. Everything lives. That's the answer to your question, Jill. Your answer to your question about what time zones plants live in, in the fact that they live in no time zone and in every time zone. And that's the whole point. They experience time differently than we humans experience time, but with fast motion, we are able to see that there are no bounds to how they use this. And that's, you know, all right, wait, where are we? So here's a lot of photos that come from Cleve Baxter, from Mimosa. We even have a bunch of pictures like this from things we did at Dom and Her. You can go and search that in the, on YouTube and such to see them. Okay, I think we're here. But more original, but more original and certainly more epical than the time-lapse shots is the film's cybernetic art sequence, documenting a performance involving artists Richard Lowenberg, John Lifton, Jim Wiseman, and Tom Zahorinek, reduced to a minimum in the picture's final edit, i.e. to footage from John Lifton's green music installation at the Tropical Conservatory of San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. The sequence has since been recalled by Lowenberg. In early 1976, Lowenberg, then an artist in residence at the NASA Ames Research Center, was asked by the film's production team to conceive a number of sequences for the screen version of The Secret Life of Plants. Influenced, among others, by cybernetics and the ecological writings of Gregory Bateson, another one to go read about and go read, Lowenberg had published in 1972 a small blurb on the concept of environetic synthesis in the now historic video magazine Radical Software, accompanied by a suggestive drawing depicting an uncanny circuited self made of a joint human head and a television monitor. The text's premise was that one's environment could be designed to respond to one's own physiology, such as brain waves in EEG and muscle potentials EMG, with video, audio, and collaborative ventures between organic and non-organic systems. Humans and non-humans tune in and become aware. Electronic mediation is the strategy chosen to counter the deafness and backgrounding to which vegetal beings are usually referred, bringing forth a new ecology of mind, as Bateson would call it. As video art pioneer Juan Downey, whose vegetal systems of communication for New York State proposed in 1972 to transform electromagnetic energy between humans and philodendrons into a navigation tool, had intuited cybernetic technology bore the portentous promise of closing the man-nature chasm. But does man really want to close that chasm? I, woman, want to close that chasm. Some men, I know, want to close that chasm. But does mankind, humankind, really want to close that chasm? How do we really get to the point where humanity really wants to close the chasm? Not just says they want to close the chasm, not just wants the chasm to close intellectually, but really feels it deep down in their bones. Because we have, as we can see, from the 1970s, even from the 1920s, even from in some of the earlier articles I've read and that we've done here in live commentary, from the 19th century at least, we already had many of these concepts. Why are we still struggling with this chasm? What do we need to do? This is my question. This is what I pose to you. What do we need in order to step out of fear and step into collaboration? Really, what do we need? What do we need? I want to know. Moreover, the images and sounds made under Lowenberg's guidance for The Secret Life of Plants embody the ideal of the electronic signal as medium. Not surprisingly, in the early 1970s, he had worked with Stania and Woody Valsuka, Plant communication was by now more than a simple business of jagged lines drawn on strips of white scrolling paper. John Baldessari might have laughed at it, but the plant communication had also become video art. Conclusion. Hold on, I want to see before I read the conclusion, what is this beautiful, oh, interesting. See, this is super cool. There was also, so this is how plants' control of audio video tape speed. Oh, shoot. Geez, did I miss this? Okay, I did miss this, but do I miss anything? Hold on. I'm reading it very quickly. Sorry, I kind of skipped this paragraph. But it's just explaining more of the actual specifics of how the thing worked. By the way, there was this super awesome, where are we? There was this super awesome, so what I'm looking for, experiment that was done. I haven't seen it in a long time. I have to find it. I don't even know where I would find it. But there was a super experiment done where they had plants watch movies in a like an art house movie theater and predict which would be the movies and choose the movie based on the number of plants that they had, how many of the plants actually enjoyed the movie through measurements that they took, that the plants chose which were the movies that were going to be screened at this art house. Super, super fun, super cool. Anyway, by the end of the 1970s, Tompkins and Bird's bestseller had captured popular imagination. References to the book popped up here and there, as in Philip Kaufman's remake of The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where green plants are played classical music in a mud bath parlor by an attentive keeper. Also, in 1979, a thriller directed by Jonathan Sarno, The Kirlian Witness, released recently under the title The Plants Are Watching, tells the story of a woman who attempts to telepathically communicate with a philodendron to find out who murdered her plant-loving sister. I remember this. The film's heroine acquires a copy of The Secret Life of Plants, becomes interested in Kirlian photography, a collection of photographic techniques used to capture the phenomenon of electrical coronal discharges, and understood by many to be auras. We actually used it in our experiment here in the effects of plant music on human health. And even rents a lie detector. An episode from Tales of the Unexpected, The Sound Machine in 1981, imagines an engine capable of perceiving the ghastly screams of flowers being cut. The same year, in an episode from Dark Room, a botanist develops an apparatus able to read Daisy's mind. His wife learns from the flower of his affair with his assistant and shoots him dead. In short, the communicative model quickly became a B-series plot. From the 1950s onwards, plant agency had become a way for science fiction and horror films to give voice to communist anxieties. The alien plant spores turned pod people in Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1956. Radiation fears, The Scowling Tree Stump from Dan Milner's From Hell It Came, 1957. Or concerns about genetic manipulation and bioengineering, the half-human, half-carnivorous plant from the Venus Flytrap, 1970. Since an army, my favorite movie was what was it called? The Thing? Which had this creature that came out of a swamp and looked like this giant kind of plant-like creature that, of course, kills everybody. But it turned out to be a guy who had turned into this swamp creature. Anyways, go check it out. It used to be my favorite film for a long time. Since an army of vegetal villains have been feasting on women's flesh for years, an exploitation film such as Please Don't Eat My Mother, starring a shy man who befriends a houseplant with unusual appetites. A parody of Roger Corman's 1960 film, The Little Shop of Horrors, featuring odd-looking, bloodthirsty, consumerist plants, could see the day in 1973. The plant craze of hippie times eventually turned plant agency into a spoof, from Baldessari's teaching a plant the alphabet to the cult classic Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. The Secret Life of Plants badly impacted serious scientific research on plant sensory and perceptual capacities. I still hate that this is... Yes, it impacted. I don't actually think now that it did impact as badly. I think we want to say that, But I actually don't believe it. I actually still think it opened the door. I think that the scientific community wants to say that because they didn't research this forever, and they claim that it's because of the secret life of plants. They didn't research it forever because they didn't want to. They didn't want to. Widespread press coverage of Baxter's pseudo experiments contributed to this backlash. Work on plant communication and plant signaling was somewhat stigmatized, and the limited availability of funding and other resources constrained further progress. It wasn't the fact that Baxter... So frustrating. Indisputably, Baxter's thesis on primary perception of plants were nonsense. Still, the real baby, the study of plant awareness and its potential challenging of the exclusiveness of both knowing and feeling as human assets, was thrown out with the bathwater. Almost 30 years had to pass before scientific works mainstreaming the perceptual sophistication of plant. Oh no, wait, hold on. Now, of course, I said main, and I was so concentrated on main that I missed the other half of the word. Main, oh gosh, hello. Main stress. Why are we going to talk about probably stressing? Stress. Streaming the perceptual sophistication of plants, such as Chamovitz. Am I missing a paragraph somewhere? Or just does the word not want to make sense in my head? Because there isn't any paragraph here, right? This is like pictures, and the words finish there with STRE, and then go straight down. Oh, mainstreaming. God, I'm so bad. Sorry. See what happens when your visual just doesn't queue up? Streaming the perceptual sophistication of plants, such as Chamovitz's What a Plant Knows, a field guide to the senses in 2012. Were to see the day as a general plant turn sweeps through the different fields of knowledge and creation. Plants and their singular life forms, for so long relegated to the margins of conceptual thinking about life itself, finally jut out the leafy decorative settings to which they were backgrounded. In our present dire ecological crisis, to acknowledge the richness and complexity of plant life is an invitation to withdraw from a centric reasoning that separated humans from nature, situated human life outside and above it. In what constituted a striking ecological critique of Enlightenment science and its holy dualisms, hippie times attempted to tell a different kind of story about man and nature. I hate the fact that they use man. Well, I guess back in the 1970s, fine. Man and nature. And grappled with fundamental epistemological shift. Most of all, they experimented widely with alternative modes of engagement and what poet Gary Snyder described as the most ruthlessly exploited classes: animals, trees, water, air, grasses. Well, that's a good list. As we emerge shell-shocked from a global pandemic, what are we to do now? Maybe we can learn from the past instead of imagining that plants are like people. As suggested by America's master gardener in 1971, we can focus instead on what it means to be human on a shared planet. Ooh, I like that ending. Very, very interesting. Super interesting on this. What do you think? Did you like it? I found it to be fascinating. I mean, I think that this is, again, another take on it. I'm glad that I went through it instead of what I was originally going to do from this particular journal. But I think there's a lot of other articles in this journal that are really great. But I love this because I think it's important to know the history, and it's important to understand the loops that we get ourselves into, right? The fact that we're still debating things like plant intelligence and even certain kinds of plant sensing we're still debating. We're debating so much the idea of consciousness and plant consciousness, and the idea of plants as agents, as beings that are alive and aware and understanding of their surroundings. We know they feel pain. We know they feel things. Doesn't mean they feel them like humans. Doesn't mean they experience death and all these other things. But we need to open ourselves to the possibilities that there is more to it than what we think. So I'm super curious about what you think. Please write in the comments. If you're watching this on the replay, thank you so much for staying all the way through to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. I really want to hear your thoughts. And also, if you have any other papers that you would like me to review, articles, journals, papers, I am open. I have a huge list. We have now made it to 2020. which is amazing since we started off on like 2000 and I don't even remember, like 2011 or 12. There's actually, no, we started in 2006, and we've read a lot of papers since then. And I'm always scouring the internet for more. There are so many really great research projects out there and so many good papers that are coming up. So I look forward to, talking more about these things with you in general comments, and then having us the ability for us to really get deeper into these types of conversations. Jill, I see your question, but it is a much longer conversation. Do trees and land hold Akashic records? The answer is connected to the Mother Worlds conversation, which is one of the conversations that we will have in the Dumb and Her Mystery School. So I highly encourage you to look into and enroll in the Mystery School, because we will there talk in communication with the plant world about the Mother Worlds, and that will help us set the ground for what is called the Akashic records. Also, because we're going to talk about plants, we're going to talk about past lives, and we're also going to experiment a little bit with plant past lives. And so a lot of this is connected into that. As you know, there is just so many topics that we can go into, and this is definitely one of those subjects that I want to get more into as we explore the more spiritual, subtle side of plants, and not just always the physical side of plants. So we have the physical, we have the artistic, and all of that we've read today to help us better understand, and then also the spiritual. So I am looking forward to getting into these conversations with you in the Dom and Her Mystery School. I'll post the link when I do the show notes so that you have everything there to find it. All right, that's it for me. Happy Friday, everyone. Please enjoy a wonderful weekend, and we will meet again in the Naturally Conscious community. And I look forward to all of our conversations. This is your online ecosystem for really exploring your plantness and exploring more shared, as I said here, what it means to be on a shared planet. Remember, always resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. That's it for me, Tigria Gardenia. I will see you again very, very, very soon. Bye.